Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
What an exciting time. First podcast number one. Andrew, this has been a long time coming.
Yeah, we've been talking about doing this for a little while, so it's a big step for us and a little bit different.
Hopefully it comes out all right and we sound like we know what we're talking about, but I'm sure we will, and get a little bit of humour, and hopefully we create some value for our listeners here, because that's the intent and that's really what we want to achieve with what we're doing here. Hopefully we create some value and you guys get a fair bit out of it. So what we wanted to talk about today was just the financial planning journey and what a financial planner does, and the 6-step process that we take our clients through in order for them to really get their financial life in order and live a life of financial freedom. That's the ultimate aim of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a process that we take every single one of our clients through. Some of you may need help in more areas rather than others, so you may focus on step 2 more rather than step 3, and vice versa. It's really just a matter of making sure that all of these things are in order so that you can achieve the financial well-being that you're looking for.
So this is the first episode, essentially a 6-step process. This will be the introduction, and then we'll outline today what those 6 steps are. And then with the next episodes that we do, we'll introduce each of those steps and run through those in a little bit more detail so everybody can sink their teeth into that and get an understanding of the journey that we take our clients on. And hopefully you get a fair bit of value out of it. So Andrew, first step for the financial planning journey.
Yeah, I mean, look, the first step is really understanding your current position. For most people, that's quite simple and not too difficult. And then really developing your goals. So what you really want to achieve out of your finances. Above and beyond that, it's sometimes quite difficult, especially for our younger clientele, to develop really what your structured goals are, whether retirement is in 10 years time, 15 years time, 20 years time. But having a solid understanding of where you're going rather than just acquiring assets and being on that rat wheel of constantly acquiring assets, developing a structured goal and what you're trying to get to is a really important step in any financial planning journey.
And I think that's a really valid point. Like, a lot of the people that we sit in front of day to day in our financial planning careers, people are going through the motions and doing their things, but it's not until you kind of lift your head up out of the everyday and sort of start to plan a little bit about what the future looks like and really sit down and think about, hey, I'm doing all of the right things. I think I go to work really hard. I'm doing everything in my career. But where am I going with all of this? Is it just some big thing down the track that, hey, one day I'm hoping that I'm going to have enough money where I don't have to worry about going to work again? Or is there a bit more strategy and a bit more structure to what we're doing? And that's really where we come in, and we help our clients flush those things out and try and get them thinking about those things that are important to them and help them develop those goals and really think about what the future looks like for them. And I guess it makes everything a lot more meaningful if you've got a direction that you're heading towards.
And Billy, how many times have you sat in front of a client and they have enough assets to be able to retire, but they almost don't even know? So when you don't have a goal set, people are just working and trying to acquire assets, but you don't even know that you're already at the point where you don't need to work. And that doesn't mean that you have to stop work. But at the end of the day, if there's no goal at the end of it, if there's no income requirement at the end of it, then you're just constantly acquiring assets and you don't know when to slow down or when to stop and when to actually enjoy life.
Understanding when enough is enough is probably a pretty common theme that we come across day in, day out, especially when we're talking to people who are progressed in their career and sort of heading towards the end of that career and recognizing what is actually possible and what is achievable. And we've been told and conditioned time and time again, and the age of 65 pops into my mind, where people talk about the pension and being able to access superannuation. But with a little bit of planning and some good discipline, it's a lot easier to achieve that a lot quicker, and you can really design whatever that looks like for you as an individual, as a family. You can really design that, and we do that all the time. And that's a pretty rewarding thing, I must say, from our perspective, when we do sit in front of someone and we put a plan together And we come out with that and they look at us and it's like we've created fire. It really is. They're quite satisfied and really happy with what we've done. So
well, I've never seen you light a fire without anything other than some pretty modern technology, Billy. So I don't know if I'll give you that much credit.
Makes it a bit easier when you've got a bit of a jerry can and a lighter, right? So, but let's just do a bit of a deeper dive just quickly on understanding your current position and what that looks like in step one.
Yeah, I mean, look, your current position is really around a few things. Sort of going back to my accounting days, it's understanding your assets and your liabilities, your debts, your personal loans, your credit cards, your mortgage, and really having a deep understanding on what your income is, where it's coming from, and what your expenses are, and how much is left over at the end of the day, which almost takes us into the second step, which is identify and maximize your surplus. So tell us a bit about that, Billy.
So one of the things that we tend to find is that the surplus is really the challenging part with all of this, because I guess a lot of people, your income is predefined. You're working, you're earning a salary, whatever that may be, trying to look at your expenses, come up with a solution to try and make sure that you're not overspending, you're operating within the confines of your income parameters, and having a look at that and seeing if there's anything that we can possibly do to try and increase the difference between what you earn and what you spend. And essentially what that is maximizing the surplus. Further down the track, we talk about what do we do with that surplus once we've captured that and maximized that. But ultimately, step number 2 is about cash flow and maximizing your cash flow position, because really that's the thing that makes the difference from a wealth creation perspective, whether that's investing in assets, whether that's driving debt down, having a greater cash flow or a greater surplus is really the thing that makes the difference.
And that's the key. I mean, if there is no surplus, or if it's all too common, especially in this day and age, if your surplus is negative, there's really very little opportunity to do anything else. And it has to be the thing that you focus on. So if there's no surplus, or if there's very little surplus, that's a really key area and a really important area. I mean, we've talked about it endless times before. You get taught so many things in school, you learn so many different topics, but one of the things that you never learn, which I think is one of the most important life skills, is how do you manage your money? And this is what this step is all about. Manage your money, make sure that you're reducing your debts as quickly as possible, or investing as much as you possibly can, and making sure that you're in a positive position, because if that's not there, then really the wheels fall off in any other part of the strategy.
That's a good segue, Andrew, into step number 3, which is a topic that's quite close to my heart, because this forms a fairly key part of any financial plan, and it's the one that keeps people up at night, I find the most, is getting your debt under control. So step number 3 that we'll be focusing on and talking about is getting your debt under control, whether that's consumer debt, like your credit card, like your afterpays of the world, or if it's something like your mortgage and thinking that, hey, this thing's around for 30 years, what do? Do I just make the minimum repayments and I'm on that wheel? Or is there something that we can do additional to try and get that thing down a lot faster? And that's the thing that I think is keeping people up at night. And that's the area that we're going to be focusing on in step number 3.
Yeah, so step number 3, as you said, Billy, is really get your debt under control. There is good debt, there's bad debt, there's ways to manage your debt. For instance, if you're in personal loan or credit card debt, then that's usually the first thing that you'll focus on because of how expensive the rates or the interest rate is that you're paying on that debt. Whereas different story if it's an investment property and you're accumulating wealth and accumulating properties, having debt in those types of asset classes is not too much of an issue, but nonetheless, still something that keeps people up at night. And there's almost a bit of a balancing act with this. And I know that me and Billy probably have 2 different viewpoints and sort of bounce off each other a little bit, that having debt is not necessarily a bad thing, provided it's the right kind of debt. And if you consider an investment that you can make, I mean, you're considering an investment that has, 6, 7, 8%, even if it's a pretty ordinary investment. If you invest in an asset class like that, as opposed to paying down an owner-occupied mortgage of an interest rate of, 2%, whatever the interest rate is on your mortgage, you're probably better off investing than paying down debt. But at the same time, you also want to reduce your debt. You want to sleep easy at night and not know that you have $2 million owed to the bank at the end of the day. So it is a bit of a balance between the financial viability of what you're doing, but then at the same time, the sleep easy and comfort levels of any financial plan as well.
I can see it now, Andrew. Step 3 is going to be a juicy one, and you can tell this is the one that gets our blood pumping. passing the sleep test is always an overlay that we apply, making sure that not only does it make sense financially, but from an emotional perspective. But once again, we will jump into that when we get the podcast on step number 3. And I'm sure that one's going to be a juicy one for all of our listeners. Across to step number 4, Andrew, developing an investment strategy.
Yeah, I mean, look, that can range, and that's probably the most exciting thing that sort of everyone sort of gets up and excited about, and that's why most people come to see us. They sort of bypass step 1, step 2, step 3, and they're already at the stage of, hey, I want to invest, I want to do something. So making sure that you're invested in the right asset classes for you, because most people think about, what is there to invest in? There's shares and property. There's a lot more than that, but that's what most people sort of think about. And any plan, you want to make sure that you're investing and growing your wealth, but you also want to make sure that you're investing in the right type of assets for you.
And that's something that we find all of the time, that investing money, there's a big difference. And I guess Andrew hit the nail on the head. You're right. A lot of people, particularly in Australia, especially because property seems to be our national sport, we tend to focus a fair bit on property, and the other secondary asset class that people are also familiar with is shares. But if you think about how much money you need to commit to buying a property, getting the right property, getting some advice around that, even if you buy a property, the difference in terms of wealth creation and your financial well-being between buying the right property versus the wrong property is absolutely poles apart. And, we all talk around the barbecue about property, and people tend to humble brag about how many properties they own in bits and pieces, but really you need to dig a little bit deeper, and it's about getting the right property or getting the right investments to provide the right passive income to allow you to work towards whatever your goal is that we've identified during step 1. So we'll do a deeper dive in step 4. There's a whole range of different assets that people can invest in the investment strategy. So that's going to be a fairly juicy podcast for our listeners to listen to, and I'm sure that you'll get a hell of a lot of value out of that one. Which then takes us on to step 5.
And step 5 is really around managing your risk. In any or in most investment strategies and in any sort of plan that you're developing, there's a few elements of risk. The most obvious that most people think about is the risk of the investments that you're investing in. What most people don't think about is almost every plan relies on one thing, and that's that you continue to have income coming in. Unfortunately in life, and we've come across it, unfortunately, many times in the practice, that doesn't necessarily always happen. If something happens to your health and your ability to earn income, unless there's a structured plan to make sure that there's some protection mechanisms in place, everything falls off. You can't invest, you can't do anything if there's no income coming in. So how do you manage your risk?
Yeah, it's always good to have a plan A, but the risk strategies that we put in place is definitely the plan B. And whilst we don't want anything to happen, it's always prudent to make sure that we've got our bases covered from that perspective. So any wealth creation strategy, journey, always needs to have a plan B, just in case things don't go to plan. And you want to make sure that if that does happen to you or your family, that you are covered. Any solid financial plan always includes an element of managing risk, and that falls across a couple of different things. But we'll do a deeper dive on that in step 5 and talk about what risk management techniques and strategies we put in place when we're constructing financial strategy for people. Takes us across to step number 6. Andrew.
Yeah, step number 6. You've developed this financial plan. You've got these grand goals that you're achieving. You've identified your surplus income. You've got assets working for you, very little debt. You've got a risk mitigation strategy in place. And at the end of it all, there's this ever elusive dream of financial freedom. There's money flowing from all sources. What do you do with that money when you're not around? What happens if you're not there? Estate planning, that's step number 6.
So what do we do from an estate planning perspective? That's right. We've done all of this work. We're in our twilight years, and eventually we all sail off into the sunset, go to sleep. And what do we do with everything, and how do we leave it all behind for the ones that we love? That's the focus on step 6. If we really do a deeper dive on that during that episode, you'll hear about how we get the right amount of money or the right amount of assets into the right hands at the right time with reducing or minimizing the tax that will be payable at that particular point in time. And that's really what all step 6 is about.
And absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, most people, you're not doing this. I mean, you are doing this for you, You're developing a financial strategy and a financial plan for yourself because you want to live a life of financial freedom. But most people, you're making these steps not only to enrich and improve your own life, but also to enrich and improve the people around you.
Andrew, step 1 through 6.
Yeah.
We did it. Hopefully it comes across all right and you can hear the enthusiasm in our voice around the craft that we practice day in, day out. Look, I think we did it justice, and hopefully our listeners think the same and listen to the next podcast that we've got, which is doing a deeper dive into step number 1. But yeah, we did it.
Absolutely. They're the steps and the things that we'll run through over the next sort of 6 podcasts. The next podcast that we'll be talking about is really that step 1, so understanding your current position and developing your financial goals. But now this gives a really nice overview of what we talk through, some of the things that we run through all of our clients with, and gives you a bit of an overview of what's to come in this podcast.
Guys, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.